Janajit Ray, a journalist, an educator, and someone who passionately believes that education makes all the difference. A well experienced student centered K 12 educational professional, Mr. Ray has worked in various capacities in several reputed schools authorized by IBO, CAIE, CBSE, and CISCE across the country. He has also worked in the print media as well as the not for profit development sector. Mr. Ray was educated in Vishwa Bharati, Shantiniketan, from school to MA in English. A skilled professional in education management and leadership, he has lots of experience in the educational training and organizational development sector. Mr. Ray strongly believes that technology aided learning and teaching will make all the difference in the years to come. As a consulting professional, he has helped in reinventing old schools and setting up new institutions. Mr. Janajit Ray, who lives a semi-retired life in Dehradun, is presently the advisor to the board of directors of Tutoroo Technologies, a Hyderabad-based edtech company. In this conversation, Suresh Kochatal speaks to Janajit Ray on a host of subjects that matters in the world of education. Welcome to Tutoroo Conversations. Education is an exciting profession to be in, especially these days. But managing a school and also managing an edtech platform takes it more than that. Today we have with us a gentleman who has spanned this all, Janajit Ray, a name that rings a bell in the field of education. He is presently the advisor to the board of directors of Tutoroo Technologies, a Hyderabad-based edtech platform. Today, as we get talking to him, let's understand his journey from his early days in Kolkata to where he is now in a semi-retired life in Dehradun. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful introduction to me.
Typically, I think you have a Amitabh Bachchan kind of voice, so it makes it all the more interesting as a conversation. My question to you would be, to start with, is can you detail out your early days in Kolkata and your journey to Shantiniketan and then back to Kolkata?
Well, Shantiniketan has been part of my life from my birth because my family was settled, and both fathers and mothers, my families were settled in Shantiniketan long ago. I mean, some of them had been students of Tagore himself. So, Shantiniketan culture was always there, which means the understanding of Tagore's philosophy was something that moved all of us and still moves all of us. And my father got a job in Moscow and moved from Shantiniketan to Moscow, and I had to go with my family when I was about 6 to 8 months old. My initial years were spent in Moscow. Back then it was the USSR, and we came back when I was 6 plus. And I started studying in Calcutta. I think it was a wonderful school I went to. It's known as Patha Bhavan. And the people there were hugely influenced by the Tagorean way of thinking, way of educating the whole personality of the child. So, and there were great names who were regular visitors to our school at that time, one of them being Satyajit Ray, another being Mrinal Sen. And I could name, there's a whole plethora of people who were really celebrities, but to us, they were coming into our classes and, reading out their work or talking to us and making things very, very different from what is written down in textbooks. However, Calcutta somehow made me feel a little claustrophobic. And my parents decided to put me in school itself to Shantiniketan. So I went to Patha Bhavan. It was a class 10 school then. And I studied there for a few years and appeared for the class 10 final. School certificate. It's known in Vishwa Bharati. I've always been a singer. Yeah. So I was treated very, very well in Shantiniketan because my father was also a singer and my mother was also very well known for her artistic abilities. So I was actually on a roll in Shantiniketan. I loved it like few others would have loved it. And I was always a little bit of a rebel myself. I got into trouble with my teachers. In fact, when one of my previous teachers in Shantiniketan, she came to visit me in one of my schools and she was completely flummoxed as to how that naughty child could become a principal now.
And I remember when I traveled to Shantiniketan over a decade ago, the place really strikes you because one is the informality of education there, students being taught under the trees, the eclectic atmosphere, the academic freedom that you have around there. Did that influence you in many ways when you got into the field of education later?
Oh, yes. I must say that this whole focus on the complete personality of children, it is something that I imbibed from Shantiniketan. There's no doubt about it. And also the belief which has been established by so-called academics recently, just about 40, 50 years ago. But Tagore always designed the curriculum or made sure that the curriculum was designed in a way that was absolutely focused on the way different people learn. And it was understood that different people learn different ways. So there was a story about Shantiniketan that when you came to see a class in Shantiniketan, you'd find some of them sitting on the trees and so,
I've seen that.
yeah. So, I mean, there was a freedom. The thing is that the student, the child was celebrated, honored. Every child needs to have that reiteration that I can do this, I can do that. People love me, With that kind of trust and faith, you can go out and do many things. And I think as an educator myself, sometimes I didn't, but most of the times I managed to live up to these ideals.
So from Shantiniketan to La Martiniere, Kolkata, back again, you taught English there.
Yeah, but that was hardly experience because I was there for 2.5 months. And that was, it was a school, very, very good teachers, but the vast numbers of students in every class was off-putting. Absolutely. Because there were classes in which if I went in and took the attendance, by naming each student, I would have 10 minutes left maybe for actual academic work. So I think that also helped because that gave me a taste of what should not be done.
In fact, from there you moved into journalism.
Yes, I did.
So, Telegraph was it?
Yes, my father was a journalist, and the Telegraph was a real startup at that time. It was a wonderful place to learn our work, and I think I had the knack for writing and relating to people in different ways, which was enhanced quite a bit when I had this opportunity of working for the Telegraph for 5 years. Some of my colleagues have made it very, very high in the field of journalism. I still have some kind of contact and communication with them. I sort of felt that as I was mm, I'd like to describe myself as a jack of all trades. And I felt very strongly that a kind of person that I was would be very correct to be in a school.
So that's what, in terms of moving from a desk to another desk, being a sub editor of a newspaper to a school.
Suresh, there was, of course, classrooms in the Doon, but there was a lot of education, and there still is a lot of education that happens outdoors because students are there 24/7. And one would get too tired if you always were inside a classroom. So, I mean, it was an education for life through living your life in real terms.
In fact, I remember I watched a movie. I think that movie really changed my perspective of life. It was Dead Poets Society,
Oh, yes.
a 1984 classic by Peter Weir. I mean, that movie really showed what a teacher should be. And I can relate to what you're talking about Doon, because Doon actually is considered a very elitist school. Was it that way?
No, I mean, there were children whose parents were celebrities, but as long as I was in Doon, they did not have any special value. They were like any other parents. And I would give them full marks for not expecting any special treatment there.
For the children.
And there are many students of mine who've become very well known in several fields, including politics. So, I mean, we had to deal with children of all kinds. And yes, elitists, I wouldn't like to call the Doon school culture as elitist, but it was definitely elite, enlightened, and it was something that essentially related you to life.
But usually, I mean, if you look at the character of Robin Williams in that movie there, I mean, the way he kind of emoted the teacher, a poetry teacher, very dry subject. In many ways, when I look at you, I often feel that, when you went on to set up various international schools later on in your life, did you carry Dead Poet Society,
Oh, yes.
the Carpe Diem concept?
And to serve with love. That was
Braithwaite. Yeah.
Yes, these were really moving films that had a tremendous effect on me. Also, Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali, when the sheer awe of enjoying everything in life as a child,
That's true.
that came through, and that has molded in many ways my understanding. Actually, I shouldn't be saying this myself, but if you ask me, what do you bring to the table as a teacher, I would say that I've always tried to be student-centered.
So 2 houses in Doon, you headed, that's I think very, doesn't come along commonly, heading 2 particular houses in that particular.
No, it was actually, there are 5 houses in Doon. So there were these houses, they were divided into 2.
Okay.
And when they were brought back together, that is when I was one part of the experiment. And there were others also who took in after me, who took on the responsibilities of being the housemaster of dual houses. So the thing is that is where you have the basic training for becoming a headmaster.
And that's how you reached Hyderabad.
Yes.
How did you come here in the first place? Was it something beckoning you here?
Well, it was destiny.
Okay.
I had no idea of India below the
Vindhyas.
Vindhyas. And by that age, I had already traveled quite a bit in various parts of the world with my parents as a child. And I didn't know this part of India really. Though in Shantiniketan, we were exposed to the arts of South India,
Okay.
Bharatnatyam and Kuchipudi and the Carnatic music, which influenced Tagore so much. And we knew about these places, but I never planned to come to Hyderabad as such. Now, when I got out of the Doon School, it took me a while to come down from a high horse. Okay. So, after many short stints at various places, I ended up in Hyderabad. And very interestingly, my last short stint before I moved to Hyderabad was also in Calcutta.
Oh, I see.
I had gone back,
Gone back.
but then I couldn't adjust there.
That's surprising for a Bengali not to adjust to Kolkata. I mean, people have moved out. I mean, you see it that way. People have gone out of Kolkata and I mean, become their own icons in their own respect.
Absolutely.
So, Oak Ridge was your first international school, or was it
Yes, yes.
school
No,
before?
no, no.
Okay. So, what is it like setting up the Oak Ridge, or how did you come about to setting up an institution like that?
Sir, when I was in Doon, thanks to my journalistic background, I got in touch or got involved in very, wonderful organization of schools
Okay.
called the Round Square Conference. Now, there is a contradiction in terms.
Round in the square.
Yeah, but we'll go into that some other time. But it was a movement of schools actually at a certain point, triggered off by this very well-known and great German and yet Jewish person, Kurt Hahn. Kurt Hahn. And the Hahnian philosophy was really very, in sync with the educational ideals of Tagore as well. And though in a different context, because the schools that he set up, Gordonston being one of them, where, it is unthinkable for at least 8 months in the year to not be inside the warmth of a classroom. Whereas Shantiniketan, we didn't really need to be in classrooms. But all said and done, it was my journalistic background that made me the editor of this Round Square magazine called The Echo. And as the editor, I had to visit various Round Square schools around the world.
Okay.
And I had seen some of those schools that was affiliated to Round Square, that were affiliated to Round Square, that, they were doing the International Baccalaureate. And especially in a couple of schools, when I saw it, I realized that this is what all education should be leading to. And though I got to know that back then there was no primary years program, neither any middle years program, it was the diploma program. And it is still a very rigorous kind of education where you look at the world from various angles.
So, how did you set up this in a place like Hyderabad? Of course, those were the days when the IT boom was just setting into Hyderabad. Early days.
My first headmaster in Doon School was Mr. Shomi Das.
Oh,
And
he's your.
no, he's not related to me, but yeah, we are more than related to each other, like Guru Shishya. And he was responsible for me to go to Dehradun. And then, of course, I worked under another person from Calcutta originally, John Mason.
Okay.
I learned a lot from both, but somehow my relationship with Mr. Das had continued. And the school that was being set up here was being consulted, the project was being consulted by Mr. Das. So that is how I ended up here, because it was Mr. Das who put me on to the group that ran Oak Ridge.
The People's Combined, then, was it?
It wasn't called People's Combined then. Then it was a very interesting thing. It was Vikas Educational Institutions Limited of Vizag.
Okay.
And they were at the time very, very well known across Andhra Pradesh for facilitating children to get into good engineering institutes, some of them also in the medical line. So they catered to that, and it was extremely exhilarating for me that such people would want to create a school which was not really about scoring marks.
Totally different.
Yes. I mean, this is the basic difference between what goes as Indian education. A certain body of information needs to be memorized, and then, I'm being very harsh, but let me have my say, and then after memorizing the thing, you are able to regurgitate it on the exam papers, so that you get the highest possible marks. But that reduces you to a Xerox machine at the very most.
No, actually, to ask you in this specific way, because you're very passionate about IB and IGCSE, and you really have set the early standards for that in India. But an Indian student learning by rote method, it really turns them also into spelling bee champions. They get into IITs, they get all that. So do you think the state boards, we have Andhra, Telangana state board here, various other states have it, then there is CBSE. CBSE has changed over the years. I remember you had a conversation with Mr. Ganguly regarding it. But why do you think that there is this so much of gap, a difference between, say, CBSE and IB and IGCSE?
You see, when we were small, and during my parents' growing up years, there was still this euphoria of having gained independence, you see. And people really wanted to do something that was related to the progress of the country. But at the same time, there were people who focused only on making money. I'm not going to name them. You all know that. And slowly but steadily, the seeds of corruption were planted there. And very soon people realized that education and healthcare
Are a business.
are a business. And of course, they could be a good front for people who didn't want to show their dark side.
Because when you look at the IB way of teaching or the IGCSE way of teaching, and I've heard you speak at so many forums, I sit in some meetings with you sometimes too. There is so much of difference. There's a world of difference, isn't it, between what is taught in a typical Indian education system and say something that comes from the IGCSE and IB. Can you just elucidate on that?
You know what is being touted as the educational policy of India? It actually puts the focus onto the past rather than the present and the future. And then also, it is still encumbered by that idea that you have to learn this when you are so much old, and this when you are so much old, and when you complete class 10, you have to give an examination, which, you see, the problem is that India actually was the place where the roots of what today is so starkly different from our education system. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. You know, my education should be such that relates me to everything in life. And after all, I realized as a teacher that I can't teach anyone anything unless that person wants to learn. And when that person wants to learn, the person obviously has the propensities to be a self-learner.
The problem is also with the parents, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The typical Indian parent is all about scoring 99.9, or, the child should not be anywhere between the rank 3. It has to be top 3 in the class. But an Indian parent will never think beyond a typical Indian parent. I'm saying not everybody. An IIT or medicine or anything like that. But to tell a child that it's okay to do music, to do arts, to do dance, and also study science at the same time, is this something that IGCSE as an option allows you to do?
Oh yes, definitely it does. But you'll be surprised to know so does CBSE. And more, for longer than CBSE, it has been allowed by CISCE. The people who run the ICSE and the ISC exams. The thing is that when the focus was shifting on to making education corporate,
Okay.
at that stage, the parents realized that the kind of education that I was exposed to will not be good at all for my children. And every parent wants their children to be happy, and fortunately or unfortunately, being happy does mean being rich, at least to some people. So you want, and in India, one thing is there I'm very, very, jittery about. This is actually the idea of being secure, having a job and security. Okay, get into a government job and you'll never be thrown out. And that means that it's not based on merit. So meritocracy had its day, but was slowly eased out. And at that time, especially the parents of children who are now in their 30s or late 20s, it became a panic situation for them. They know that what I did is not good enough. Where do I go? Then there were people like us who came and told them, come, this is the way forward.
So how difficult is it for a student from, say, CBSE, say in class 7th or 8th, to move into something like an IGCSE?
I'll tell you. The thing is that IGCSE or the IB courses they actually want your thinking and your capacities to develop so that you have your own point of view.
So that's like being a rebel. You don't ask questions in a typical Indian school. You're considered a troublemaker.
Yeah, but here, I mean, more often than not, you'll have the students asking questions. That is the focus of these things. Students ask for the questions. They do not expect the teachers to be walking encyclopedias and give them the answers, but they are trained to actually go after the answers on their own.
So, but actually, if you do, you get the right kind of teachers, because we've seen that.
In that, there are, but that is where the Indian student, when suddenly asked to change from basically a cut and paste method of education into an education where you have to think for yourself, create your own opinion, and live according to what you know as true for that time. I mean, that is something that needs, I am very, very sure, a kind of bridging, because during the most impressionable years of the growth of a child, if she or he is exposed to, you know, the education which limits you, not the education which gives you freedom, you have to be trained, retrained to come up with those skills that would take you higher. But the thing is that once this transition is made, children of Indian origin, I think they do wonderfully in these exams, international exams. And I would not belittle the power of memory, Shruti, which was the way we learnt, but it was memorizing things that you understood, that you assimilated within yourself, and then you could express them in various ways. So, this is the difference. Unfortunately, what you do in B.Ed courses is how you make them. B.Ed courses, unfortunately, never keep pace with the kind of developments actually happening in the world of school education. I mean, today, there is no need for manually doing certain things that make life a burden for teachers. You can use EdTech to ease the problematic situations, but it's in the mind, you see. They will not go for EdTech or anything because,
But that got sorted out during the pandemic, isn't it? We saw
absolutely.
a huge shift towards online education.
Absolutely.
And today it's become a hybrid model where even after the schools have gone online,
I think it's been a boon in disguise for us, this pandemic, for countries like India. And I say this because we followed the colonial model. We did not follow the ancient Indian model. Then there would be more Shantiniketans here. Okay. What was the focus of the colonial powers? They had to use education to make us servile, okay, to make us slaves to them. In many ways, there was a part of education, of Western education, that actually liberated us. But the mainstay of Indian education was built on, making things by way of, how do I put it? They would want to absolutely be such people who will be given a task and will carry it out. And you go to any of these countries that were under colonial rule,
They all follow the same.
they are all like that. And in India, things have gone so bad that, I mean, the children today, they have become bored with what goes on inside the school. They know they have to do this and treat it as a social evil because they know that once they pass out of school and out of college, they'll have to unlearn and relearn.
What they've been taught in school.
Yes.
In fact, that's where the question comes in is today, you are a teacher, you are still are a teacher, despite being at the senior management levels in different schools. But when you look at today's teachers, one is a respect that is really not given to teachers by the school managements. In many cases, by the parents, they expect that the schools have to do magic with the kids, and of course, the children themselves. Over the years, we've seen that respect eroding to a large extent, and teachers are today taken like any other job, any other profession, not that noble profession which we used to talk about one time. Do you think the time has come now for our educators to understand, for parents to understand, look, teachers are an essential part of your child's life?
Absolutely, absolutely. But the thing is that being a teacher in a government school, and if you have the right political connections, gives you a very stable, secure job. People who come there not for the love of knowledge, not for facilitating learning, but they are there to ensure that their life remains in the same blinkers on mode. I am quite certain that there are people in our country that make excellent facilitators. This word teacher itself gives a wrong impression.
A mentor, so to speak of.
Yeah.
People use mentor, some schools use that as a word.
Well, now the thinking is changing, thank God. And I do think that we have fabulous teachers, and I've traveled around the world. I've seen Indian teachers in China, in United States, in Great Britain, in Australia, in Africa. They don't take teaching as a profession merely.
It's a passion.
It's a calling. It's a calling, you know. And they are sophisticated enough not to want to impose on their children, to let the children think, to let the children, you know, do whatever they want by way of learning, but they shepherd them from going off track. And you see, nowadays there are teachers who are not looking at educational technology. They will fall by the way.
We faced her. That's wonderful, actually. As we come to the end of the conversation, Mr. Ray, one of the things I want to ask you is what does the future of education look like in India? Because the entire pandemic brought about a sea change in the way education is taught, education is kind of provided for. But when you look at the future, you see schools churning out children by the lakhs, by the thousands, by the lakhs. And then, of course, then they get into engineering, where again they get into or medicine and various forms. But what's the future of education? Because you have spent a huge decades in this field to know what it is.
Well, I am quite certain and convinced that for the human being, at least in India, if not anywhere else, the pandemic came as a boon, as I've said before, and it has actually made everyone try to learn for himself and for herself. I mean, maybe it started with what is this virus, but then certain things, certain modes of inquiry, which are very, very important for, the international scheme of education, those things were again reignited.
Okay.
I mean, there are various things in which we started taking interest, maybe because of the fear of death, but we did start doing our own researches, actually making our own opinions clear to other people. And, the way people learn became very, very correct, if I may say so. So, now that this has already had some kind of legitimacy, and since it can't go back to the old system ever, the hybrid system will be there. And educational technology is a sphere which can make things happen for you much faster than the regular traditional schooling systems. And that has to be actually what the teachers of today,
Need to come up with.
yes. So when you ask me what is the future of education like, I am an optimist always, and I believe in the goodness of humanity. And again, I'm quite certain and convinced that it will be the kind of education that needs to, liberate the human being. And
That's a wonderful, wonderful way of putting it across. I think it's been a wonderful conversation, Mr. Ray. And I'm sure that many of the hundreds and thousands of teachers who have worked under you, who have been the agents of change all along, they all would relate to what you're saying today, because it's not just the gray hairs that brings in the experience, but more than that, it's a system of education that has made it possible. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Janajit Ray, director in many ways in many schools, principal, teacher, and various other things. And now, of course, an advisor to the board of directors of Tutoroo Technologies. He spoke his heart today about how he moved the city of Kolkata to Shantiniketan within West Bengal, to Doon, to Hyderabad, and various other places. And of course, what he has to say about the way education is evolving. Thank you for watching.